가서 아니 당기 고도 아니 다지 파바제르시 쿠란기 디 symbolize 뭐래 디 아니 주주 사게 탐지 얘기 인지 첨부죠 어르스 인지 첨부 디 인지 첨부 they become the form of deity telya ne Chenrezig patse dashi
So as I said earlier, in terms of the symbolic meaning of the noble Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara is considered to be the embodiment of the great compassion of all of the Buddhas of the 10 directions, arisen in the form of a deity. So in short, Avalokiteshvara is a symbol of great compassion.
For activities, for qualities and for activities and that and semeshing
And then in terms of the 4 activities or 4 qualities that Avalokiteshvara embodies or engages in, it is the 4 immeasurables, the 4 limitless ones.
냠소 렘베 구름도디 안남규 땅뇽 녜라 땅뇽 토마르 냠슬랜 디네마 지기 냠슬랜 냠슬렘베 구름디 this midrado which on the order.
When the 4 immeasurables are explained, they are explained in the order of love, compassion, joy, and impartiality. That's the usual order for their explanation. But in terms of their practice, the usual order in which the 4 immeasurables are practiced begins with impartiality or equanimity and continues on there in the usual way, or in the same order as the explanation order: love, compassion, and impartiality. But in the practice, in the context of practice, then impartiality comes first.
Dona, the nyamle sadi susugi. Nyamle chenge susugi. Ta ji nyamnyo senatado. Susugi kandar the choasane, the feelings of me. That digidi the dunguar of choyo in Dusane. 다 당부 세메시난 당부 냠내 가르쳐나 수심리야 지 펜쳐와다 양다 지 가주에 수심리 대화로 가르여비네 다 대조셔 차야만 no need to follow the words some 다디 고림도 되나 책이 고림다고 해서 게임도 없어.
But when we ourselves approach the practice of the 4 limitless ones, without having any previous exposure to these, we can simply follow our own inspiration and our own sense of what we should start with and what order we should approach these practices in. So no matter what we choose to start off with, the main point or the most important thing is that we should choose one of the 4 immeasurables and choose one of these practices that we get a sense of benefit from for ourselves. in terms of benefiting our mind, or in terms of accessibility, feeling a connection with the practice. So we should feel the freedom to choose the order that makes the most sense to us. We don't necessarily have to follow the traditional order in this case.
다 지단기 땅 아주 미진 않을래야 지게 미카셰 지 수술이야 지 타니버스는 다도 수술은 제가 전부 해야 돼봐 안지 지 수술 셈리냐 저기 가르쳐지 셈타니 위에 되버스는 다도 야나지 초 초변 두시에로지 제변 두시 전부 해야 돼 근데 영어 쓰래 다나 신기 안 가시 근데 야 미세 수수 근데 미세 제가 매봐 저 초변 제가 셈타니 위에 매대 근데 망고 영어 쓰래 안 가시 아주 수수 셈나로야 지베 디트 가져다 셈데서 막아야 되지 셈을 막아봐 안지 셈라 막아야 돼 근데다 미 근데 영어도 알아 진짜 미 다가다지 말아주지 가셔야 돼 다니엔 파르마섬을 자다 니엔다 안 파르마스두스안에 시다 다다 니엔 잡으시다면 다 근데 기타 지금 뭐뭐지 영어도 알아
In terms of the sentient beings that we relate to in the context of this practice and in our daily lives, there are, of course, sentient beings that are close to us, sentient beings that we feel a connection with and some affection for, and some natural love and appreciation towards. Also, there are sentient beings who we don't have any special connection with, we don't have any special familiarity with or feeling for. And then, of course, there is the third category of sentient beings who we don't like all that much, who we have a little bit of a difficult time relating to. So, in general, we can speak of these three broad categories of sentient beings, which in traditional language we call enemies, friends, and those in between.
진짜 변은 교랑 friend 교랑기다지 초보 양슈 델레야 교랑기 지가주에 제번은 신지 수수 다들 다는 신샤오르서는 자식야담 다는 샤오르서나 다디즈 갈라카버스 maybe theoretically maybe it's possible technically impossible somewhere but this galay 됩시오 이내야다 디 인지비 자식야도 되는 신지 소고사디 디 녜삼리아다 가르주제 first steps 나도 조치슈디 게치슈디 지 가르주에다 마술리아다 가시 미가시 데제 소소는 제바 타녀와요 되고 가시 데제 타 롱와요 되는데 건 technically somewhere that the tone device tone 타니지 용 니스토로 연구요 아래 드네 뉴스안에 텔레sem제 제거하러 시작하면도 삼정도 있어 이나 내가 치슈디 가르쳐되었으나 디 수수의 초보야 시될 제번은 아주 이 야부 제번은 시지 수수 다테라 더즈 야부 제 모토비네야 베이직 섬으로다지 시제 차네 가르쳐들이야 자들이야 지 참바든 제외 삼바 자완이니 매바 된듯이 매바지 차과디 더다디 개치슈지레샤
Of course, the four immeasurables are practices that have an aim of increasing our loving kindness and compassion towards all sentient beings, friends, enemies, and those who are neutral, or those who are in between. You might be tempted to kind of idealize this and think that, well, the goal is then in the end to treat our enemies in exactly the same way that we treat our friends. Well, in theory, that might be possible, But in practice, it's not really possible. And we don't need to set that kind of a goal for ourselves. We don't need to set up a goal of treating our enemies or those who we have difficulties with in the exact same manner as we treat our friends. But rather, we can take a step to gradually increase our loving kindness and compassion toward those who we have difficulties with. So we can see what first steps we need to take. So in a practical sense, in our daily lives, there will be sentient beings who are more close to us, and there will be other sentient beings who are more distant from us. We don't need to worry about that basic fact so much. The most important thing that we should try to do is try to avoid a situation where we have absolutely no regard, absolutely no affection or love whatsoever for our enemies. That is a basic starting point that we can try to work towards.
From looking from very basic situations. 딱 아주 하장기 가르르다 시제 차네 삼도하지. 아주 심지어 탐제 랑게 년이나 랑 자이나 자. 아주 자년 가야면 버르지. 이제 이면다 강강로 지 대화 된대요. 동해 된대요. 다들 거나 진짜 desire 진짜 간달지. 예. 초나이 디도그 초아에 되는데 심상만 지고 차. 제가 진짜지기 very basic 가서다 situation스는 다도 야는지 하장다 시제 차네 아주 심지어 상으로 당념스는 다도 상으로라디 대화 토야기 장왕다 토당 예대비치 동해 대학이 장왕다 토당 예대비치 they have right some 디지에 되지 디지 임베지래 아주 지송체고 하지다 아주 귀십체고 하지 다디 디지 삼동과디 당념사디 시제 삼동다로 디지 인사 삼동.
So this brings us to the first stage of practice, which is equanimity or impartiality. Basically, equanimity or impartiality looks at things from the perspective of a very basic situation. And that very basic situation is that all sentient beings, no matter whether they are our enemies or our friends or neutral beings, they all have a desire to possess happiness. They all have a desire to be free from suffering. So from the perspective of that very basic feeling, all sentient beings are equal. So this is the first acknowledgement of the practice of equanimity, starting with that very basic reality. And then from there, cultivating further the acknowledgement and realization that all sentient beings have the freedom and the right to enjoy happiness, and that all sentient beings have the freedom and the right to be free of suffering, cultivating a sense of deeper acknowledgement of that fact and respect for that fact.
It's okay. 다 이미네야. 그 베이직 단계시에는 신기. 고라 시제 차네. 에너지. 대화 된대요 봐. 동해 된대요 봐. 다 딘디지 미지 이버디. 아주 제는 정도. 그런 그 베이직 the right senan다도 베이직 가서 그런들 톱단지 해버들이야. 아주기. 그 가서야 돼. 구셔면 체. 델리양 아주 다지 지통 매버 체나 된 정도스. 주내버 체들 렌스 좀 이내 한다 간다. 그러나 베이직 라이드 아주 단독이 구셔.
So even In the context of an enemy who does us harm, we can bring this contemplation to mind. We might have an enemy or a difficult sentient being who has done harm to us, and we might entertain the thought of taking revenge upon that person or giving that being harm in return. From one perspective, a mundane perspective, it's fine for us to want to get back at them. There's nothing forbidden about that thought per se. But from the perspective of the contemplation of equanimity, the basic reality that this sentient being also has a right to enjoy happiness and a right to be free from suffering, it's not really okay for us to completely disrespect that basic reality. It's not really okay for us to completely disrespect and fail to acknowledge this being's right to enjoy happiness and right and freedom to be free from suffering. And from that perspective, wanting to take revenge on someone doesn't really make sense.
딘드지기 시제차는 아주 상마 지구의 인백 다와 천안디 아주 개침을 짓고 하다 개침이 안 도스.
So from this basic perspective of being human beings, the same as our enemies, from an even broader perspective of all of us sentient beings having the same basic desire of wanting to enjoy happiness and wanting to be free of suffering, we have the same desire, the same feeling, and respecting that is very important.
가인스나 저분이 돌려야지 추루 점인데 망고에다 봐. 다는 신기다지 내다지 미리 점이다 다는 신기 트래디셔널 점이다 망고에다 디 참참 아주 시제 차네 제 로미 베지과 심지 베지과 인데베기 가서다 지규르게 따완로디 천안으로 시다 용음이다 디 드립니 텔레야지 가서에 디 따와도 봐 드립체 안 디게 아주 사물로 핀수지지리야 딱 안다르지 초리치하다 차당 첨부치하다 딱 디지 망부지 어디가
These days in the world, there are so many different groups. There's very many different spiritual traditions, many different types of people. And sometimes we forget that we're all the same in this very basic way that I've just described. We forget that basic sameness, and that acknowledgement of this basic sameness becomes obscured. And as a result of that, we fall into attitudes of bias and also attitudes of attachment and aversion.
단디제기 꾸뇽 그 따와 땅뇽기 천하로 지여비나 아주 참참 no necessary fear down doubt down 다지 미지 다지 믿음이 봐도 지금 no necessary fear the doubt the 망부지人性系统而지변토르섬这个都是俺来的변토르 중
If we have, however, if we can remember this basic reality of the equality of everyone, if we can have impartiality in this way, then fear and doubt will not be as necessary as they were before in terms of the basic connection that we have with other human beings. If we have an impartiality that acknowledges the basic same desire of everyone, then fear and doubt will
다
naturally
너는
be pacified.
진짜
And this has been my own
당념
experience.
세나자도 꾸념 정 아주다지 가르다지 타 미카시에 타니베지 선타니베 미카시 선타르 미 진짜 용거래 강갈로 지 초보스샤이 강갈로 초보스 투야 돼 갈아 가보시자로 가시에 kon 소수다 디즈양 가르다지 가시 시가 경부에 되면 나 디즈 초보스야 디스가 하고 드네 바다 양인지 대체 아니 딱 쟤는 야가 예배소 드네 용이 알아 다 간다야 다 이제 삼타 니린 세난자도 다 레버 치중사의 연구래 이내양 시제차다 아주 당기 시험나시 아주 시제 내당 지고 차려야지 라바르도 버리보데 랑게 저우이미 윤생기 아다고 동해 총나야 총 양 참상 아주 동해 용화 쇼었으면 된 거로 버리보데 저우들 다 코란 동해 총나 sometimes we make a wish someone that 코란 동해 총나 아무도 없어 이내야 근데 sometimes 지당 코란 저우이미 윤생 코란 네바 체외 윤생 때는 다게 시험은 신 대량 아주 never chever tell len chekwa chiara dine Quran do in big one part is the enemy basically is a human being someone the need to teach you and delia respect not totally like a denial did you catch me sir
So it will happen that some sentient beings are closer to us and others are further away. And we can't just be pretending that we're going to be friends in a literal sense with all sentient beings. That would be very difficult. Furthermore, there are some sentient beings who have very harsh character, very harsh personalities, and it might in fact be better for us to keep ourselves at a distance from those sentient beings. So closeness and distance with regard to our feeling toward others, closeness and distance with regard to our connection with others, having those distinctions is fine. But what we should try to add to the mix is this acknowledgement that we are all the same in a basic sense in terms of our wanting happiness and wanting to be free from suffering. And so in the case of enemies, if someone else does us harm, at least we can have this basic acknowledgement that they are a human too and they also want to be happy, rather than only thinking negative thoughts about them, such as if they suffer, that's fine, or in an extreme case, we might even wish suffering upon others. We might think to ourselves, oh, it's good if this sentient being suffers. So having impartiality can reduce that type of attitude and bring us into more of a general acknowledgement of the basic humanity of this sentient being and an acknowledgement that we are the same as them in a very basic way. So when we have a difficult sentient being, one part of them might be that they are our enemy or a difficult sentient being for us, but the other part of the situation is that they are basically human. And with the practice of impartiality or equanimity, we come to respect that basic fact more and more and not deny it.
And 대신도 당기 공수시반나시 시제차는 고주 대화 된도에 봐. 동안 된도에 봐. 디지 desires 나다도 지 퇴열 wish로 디지 예비 인사 디 균전되네 아주 지 참바의 인지기 산 현래의 참바의 인지기 삼바께과 균전디 시제차는 고주 디지 예비 인사 디 균전되네 아주 참바의 인지기과 진사래.
So it is because of this basic sameness that we share with sentient beings in wanting to be happy and wanting to avoid suffering that becomes the basic reason why it is reasonable to cultivate loving kindness and compassion towards sentient beings. This basic sameness that we share is the main reason, or the basic reason, why we would want to cultivate loving kindness and compassion for sentient beings.
당기 권도 주변에 신기 참바든지 사대 지 소소리아 지 미신다를 강해를 제 뒤 소소리아 임팩트 연구협이나 신의 지 도난체대 알로지 신의 지 가서요 삼동아 지 용한대 알아보지 야나 란다 제바예바서 란다 제바예바 진짜기 제바에 미든젤이야 강에 총비나 신의 도나치대 버르지 마도지기 드린 주산에 아주 따지 노르소 신세스므로 아주 참바든지 예데비 에너지 럽첨으로 가첨으로 드지 매위 주산에 to the end nobody is helping you somewhere 따지 라네 자와 칭게 말아 그래서나 수수 현례야 제외 somebody 지 voluntarily somewhere 따지 미신다야 로버치아 삼바당 아니지 제외 somebody 야게 마담 인주산에 다 되게 미상만 찍어도 차지 타마텔이야 소소레 주 아니지 자와 쟁겐다 안다는 신기 지 큰순 제아디 명조대 알아지. 라고 가르쳐 상황을 interdependent sort of the circle of the tradition going on is
As I noted before, without the difficulties of others having a direct impact on us, it is often difficult for us to feel genuine concern about others and their suffering. And without having or feeling a direct connection toward another sentient being, it's difficult for us to have a sense of concern about what they're going through. And without this genuine sense of concern and connection, we're not able to develop a quality of love and compassion that is vast, expansive, and powerful. And if we continue along in that way, practicing love in that way, then in the end, nobody is going to be helped, not even ourselves. What we will find in the end, that the love we receive from others also begins to decrease and decrease, because the love that we are extending outward to others is not genuine and is not increasing. So if the love that we try to offer for others isn't born out of a genuine concern for others and a genuine sense of connection with others, then because the nature of reality is interdependent and everything goes in a circle, then the love that we receive in the end will also decrease and decrease if we keep on approaching it in that way.
exercise 다디지 참바든지 든지 소소하게 삼바나 신지 든지 이용미용 섬으로 다지 든지 용 투미투브르지 아주 최다체 든지 배주샤데 개침샤.
And so to avoid that from happening, we need to approach loving kindness and compassion as a training, and even as similar to a form of daily exercise, something that we actually have to test and expand the limits of on a day-to-day basis. To see in the same manner of exercise is if we can take our loving kindness and compassion a little bit further to make it a little bit stronger, to test it out on a day-to-day basis, and try to grow our loving kindness and compassion genuinely in this way.
다이네 아주 통말지 잡아든 니지 냠내 체외거리 아주 expectation도 줘. 당연히 심지어 삼제를 잡아든 인지 심 기부지 somebody 가르쳐지 잡아든 인지 심 야부지 계기 인사마로지 대지 somebody 다지 기부지 당 야부지 야 드레지긴 하네. The good situation somewhere. That is the thought and chicken somewhere. That it is gonna happen. Carresana, Chavan in Giala, Corji Cartway. Really takes sort of Cartwataji exercise. Tabardo and the G. Chabadaniji mitumbi cho. Digidelia, the face to chase. This is the Nyamdo. 따지 참섬 당원에 깔아카부에 비냐 나도 수수기 따지 페이스 체체 딘디지 트레이닝 샤과데 개심으로 만도 맞죠 도마 expectation of 잠바드 민상월로 베 야부에 되버지 되는 게 잠바드 니지 삼바드 기부지 제네 다 민상월로라 다지 기프트 저지 되게 삼으로지 삼으로지 베 삼으로 기부로지
At the same time, we should be mindful of any preconceptions we might have about our training in loving kindness and compassion, and any expectations we might have of ourselves. We might set out with a nice motivation to say, oh, I'm going to practice loving kindness and compassion. It's going to be so great. It's going to be happy when I extend loving kindness and compassion. I'm going to give sentient beings a great gift of love and compassion. But then, if we set out with that kind of a little bit of a naive intention, what we might find is that when we come face to face with the obstacles to loving kindness and compassion that are also present within our own minds, then that's more of a wake-up call that's not pleasant. So we should be aware that loving kindness and compassion and training in loving kindness and compassion is not always easy, and that we're going to face obstacles that are present in our own minds as the antithesis of loving kindness and compassion, and we're going to have to get to know them too and train with them. So loving kindness and compassion isn't always a happy, pleasant thing. It's not always 100% cheerful in terms of training in it and developing those qualities. So we should be realistic in terms of our expectations.
Very comfortable. Expectation. 다 바르제시라 매와 comfortable. 아니 소소하게 잡아든지 되게 바르제 매와 집에 기본으로 되는지 expectation도 체리어라. 다 미진 척이 갱엔도 총백걸라 다 용서 말았어. 당에 잡아든지 컴퓨터서 말 다 용서 말았어. 다 가셔야 되지. give up를 쳐. 가두인의 expectation 데 가르쳐서 waiting for something somewhere 다지 배지 comfortable 다나지 very successful 다 라말리 질럽슈니 배 blessing me very successful very comfortable and the 지사저와 딘디질리 waiting 아주지 딘디질 리구체 가두인의 딘디지 영하기 라와르 체지 대비인자 띵 아주 냠낸 디스 야게민저 냠네 야게 오만 로와나 아주 저와디 디스 깽이 영화라 저와잡 waiting for 미진초가 깽이 영화 저와잡네 근데 대견다 세네 지가르 수수 다 가르 오늘 전에 다 exercise retraining realistic training which 총비입니다. 아니 신의 정아서 야개용 토야요지. 드리지 인사를 삼다.
The main reason why our practice gets stuck and we don't have a sense of fulfillment or enhancement of our practice is because we have expectations that when we do the practice, things are going to be comfortable and there's going to be no obstacles. We expect our practice to be pleasant and to induce pleasant feelings. And because of that expectation, when our actual experience turns out to involve feelings that are unpleasant, and when our actual experience turns out to involve some meeting up with some adverse conditions, we immediately give up. We lose heart. We think, it's not happening. I'm not going to be able to do this. So in that case, we're erroneously waiting for success in the form of superficial comfort. And with that type of attitude, we might request our gurus or teachers to bless us so that we have a nice practice, a comfortable practice, and so forth. But that's just an attitude of inaccurate hope. And through that attitude, our practice does not improve. If we really want our practice to improve and to deepen, a more skillful attitude to take would be to actually hope for adverse conditions to arise, to actually hope that our experience will challenge us, will reveal to us our own shortcomings, and that we will be able to meet those difficulties face to face in an open and honest way, treating everything that arises as an exercise in the further development of compassion. If we take that type of an attitude, then we will be engaging in realistic training. And if we can really practice with that type of attitude, then I think that we will see the genuine flourishing and genuine success of our training in compassion.
bodhisattva chenju sambasa da boji the heroes the bold which encouragement, full of encouragement. Training and the meeting with Chog, yeah, Jigbomeva. The Nijigi Takanda, the Jigbomeva, the Bows and Rando, the Jigi Kandar Ningdop Taneva, the Digi Haji, and it's Chenrezig. And the Kibu Yaboyana, the Samal Bowrata, Chibarata. Diana, that Kange Chumbekolia, Bowmamati Kange Chumbekolia. Korangaji never returned to that is in bone a matter of the Chadiano. The Hindustan teachings and then as well as encouragement required. And that is Sammy the Zo de Jiganzu Samaju heroic Karsomataji. The technology both and Lamsanti that don't do the legal both are the encouragement. That Jidan just simply up and the Rang Rally is a symbol of Jida. And Rang Ralia at the near give some strength to yourself.
So, in traditional Buddhist language, those who embody fully the trainings in the four immeasurables are called the bodhisattvas. And the Tibetan name for this word is Changchup Sempa. Changchup meaning bodhi or awakened, Sempa meaning heroic or courageous being. And the reason why the bodhisattvas are heroic or courageous is because they have a quality of strength of heart, and they are not afraid of engaging in the trainings of loving kindness and compassion. They are not afraid of adverse conditions arising in their training. And because they are not hesitant or afraid to face adverse circumstances and difficulties, they are therefore brave. They are therefore heroic. If everything was pleasant and happy all the time, it'd be no problem for everyone to be heroic and brave, because there's not really too much to be heroic and brave in the face of. But what really makes a person heroic and brave is that they are heroic and brave in the face of adverse circumstances, in the face of challenges, in the face of difficulties. And so the main quality that enables the bodhisattvas to be heroic or courageous in the face of difficulties is that they give encouragement to themselves, they trust themselves, and they are able to give strength to themselves.
나들이 인주산다 지선이 가르디 제레스기다 곰 즉 가르 곰놈자 다 디드린다 제레스기 나바바 제레스기 다 랑기 지위줄 다 제레스 곰체 제레스 곰니 다들이 샤들 요래 냠네 차 다 대한 조데 랑가랑리아다 encouragement there.
So tomorrow we will proceed with the meditation transmission of Avalokiteshvara, which is basically a method of visualizing this bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, above the crown of one's head as a method for giving oneself encouragement to train in the qualities of the four immeasurables.
다디 탑시지래 가르에서나 다 런이지 전주 삼바 니임벌 몇바체 다지 런 전주 제레스 임베 몇바르체 안데 안 제레스 스르사네 상계 탐지기 닌지기 다 뉴바르식 간다 드네지기 다지 닌지 정수 닌지 등이를 지메 인도사나 다디 소소 tenderbi niji dangi de kurson sambarche diri che nusan rang rang ya be nuba chambru jinje rang rang nido chambru jinje da namju ngazu de gilu sarjo lelo da gilu re da ina da kap de dusan ngazu da ji su lia ji sing semla sing de da nga chunju 상교 탐지기다 niji dangi rangi sambarche 드리지 닝도 지인도 사네 아주 대식 남주인다 면라와르지 다 대식이 심쇼를 봐야지 그래서 연구로 봐 가시를 연구한다 가시를 지진의 연구 이기만 안에 다 남주인 아주 근데 삽삽 맞아요 삽삽이라 맞아요 아니 미신아 지 삼성 컨트롤랑 samsam chado lang de chirwa ta ina jeres yin be meba chen sa jela ta chado lang de debo mi do jeres yin an chado lang je kinda de de an de zhen xin de ka shuo de ji chado lang an zhe min do sam de ji an kong zhu qian na jeres yin de ba guang kong zhu lang de ba no so ma qing me qing 다 가나 저 수수술이야다 지 깁섬 또 슈퍼파워 som을 저 수술 때지 진짜로 치아로지 덥시르지 단도나 지 수수기 지 기루 뇽래로 진짜 뭐하나 마대치지 아니 수술 셈이야 승대지 녜지다 지 제토그레 삼버지 아니 지 수수지 지기 인삼버지 지기 닝라 톱지인 거야디 계속 시라 인사
So the practice of Avalokiteshvara is a skillful method for encouraging ourselves toward the practice of compassion. One visualizes Avalokiteshvara above the crown of one's head, and one comes to further relate to Avalokiteshvara through the meditation and visualization practices in a way in which one eventually identifies with Avalokiteshvara, thinking, I myself have become the great Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of the compassion of all of the Buddhas, the expression of all of the energy of compassion of all of the Buddhas. And by thinking in this way, that we ourselves have become such an embodiment of compassion, we are essentially giving ourselves further encouragement, and we are allowing ourselves an opportunity to slip out of our usual habit of laziness and self-discouragement that assumes that we can't have great compassion. But rather here, through identifying with Avalokiteshvara, we are giving great encouragement and energy to our minds, which basically says, I can do this and I will do this. And so the practice becomes a skillful method in this way. And some people, when they do the practice, find that they can connect with this type of inspiration. Some people might not be able to connect with this type of inspiration through this particular practice or through this particular method. But in any case, for those who do connect with it, the practice becomes a method by which we can transform our usual habits. Because when we're identifying ourselves as Avalokiteshvara, we might have an ordinary mundane habit of becoming angry or becoming jealous at others. But once we've taken on the identity of Avalokiteshvara and saying, I myself am the embodiment of the compassion of all Buddhas, it's not so comfortable to get jealous at someone. It's not such a good fit to become angry with someone. So in this way, the practice of encouraging ourselves by identifying with Avalokiteshvara can be a powerful way to transform our usual mundane emotional habits. It's kind of like giving ourselves a superpower or a supercharge of compassion. But in the end, it's a skillful method to encourage our minds and to slip out of our usual habit of laziness. We give ourselves encouragement that thinks, I can have great compassion, I can do it, and I will do it.
어떤 드린 루심다 드린 주산에 다 드린기 치료차례다 대점도 치료샤. 다네 선이 선이 다디 모티네다 세메시 거리나래 다디고 근데 디 Chenrezig 공룡차례
That's about it for this afternoon's teaching session. And tomorrow, during our sessions, we will continue with our discussion of the four immeasurables, as well as the meditation transmission of Avalokiteshvara.